Marissa Norcross.
And I'm Dave Freund, and this is The Next Page. Marissa, how are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I'm good. I bet you're great. 'Cause, man, the weather outside is Marissa weather.
It is so nice.
Even now, and with the longer days, with daylight savings time, and you have to be in your glory.
I am. I truly am.
Good. So we're at part 3 of your superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the end. There is no part 4. At least I haven't thought of part 4 yet. No, there is no part 4. So this is part 3.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you think of, because you and I kind of talked about it.
Yep.
What are your thoughts? Do you think it's a viable topic that we're going to spend some time on?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago you asked me if do you think a post in a podcast about connecting while speaking is something people want to hear? And I was surprised that you even would ask me that, because I think so, and it tied in perfectly with what we had been talking about the last 2 weeks. The importance of connecting and communicating.
Right. And because I think sometimes that people may shy away from, or people may just say, well, I don't do public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do you lead team meetings?
Right.
Do you, and you might be asked to do some public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And people shouldn't be afraid. I know that part of our John Maxwell certification is you have to give like a 5-minute talk, and people panic about it. And we're like telling them, no, relax. It's only in front of your table here. You're not standing up in front of 1,000 people, but they're so concerned about it, and they shouldn't be. And so the way I launched my post was I said, have you ever been to a talk or a keynote or something where the person was speaking and time just flew by.
Mm-hmm.
And like as the speaker walks across in front of the room or across the stage, your eyes just follow them, like you're locked in with attention. And when they're done, you wish they would have gone longer. Now, sadly, we may have fewer people that have had that experience than like I really wish they'd be done.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wish it was over with. But the people, or the other example I use is teachers that you had in school that you really like. And so, did you have any favorite teachers in school?
Oh, yeah. I had a lot of favorite teachers. I really loved school.
I bet.
My mom's listening and she's like, what? But
what?
No, I really, I had several teachers that were just so skilled in the way they connected with students and the way they delivered their content. And I think sometimes you might not realize it. Like maybe I didn't recognize it so much then, but looking back, because there are still things that, like I do a lot of editing or things I'm working on, or now that I help my daughter with her schoolwork, things that, and I can almost hear my teachers saying it. Like every time I'm editing something and I move a comma in a quote, I hear my 3rd grade teacher saying, comma beats the quote. And like every single time. And they're just little things like that where that's how you know that they like really connected, because you remember them.
And I keep you really busy moving commas and quotes.
I move a lot of commas, people.
She does. But it's, and that's why I tell people nobody ever sees anything I write except for a personal email, unless Marissa has seen it first, to make it sound a little bit more intelligent. But yeah, these teachers, these speakers were able to connect with us.
Mm-hmm.
I tell a story, and when I tell this story in front of schools, like teachers or administrators, I'll get a gasp. But, when my first time through taking trigonometry, I didn't connect with the teacher at all, and I found reasons to go to band instead of trig. Mm-hmm. And I remember coming up to the first exam, and I just was so lost. And I said to the teacher, hey, I don't understand this. What should I do? And I don't know if have I ever told this on one of our podcasts?
I don't think so. I don't remember trigonometry.
Okay. So I go to my teacher and I said, Mr. So-and-so, and I will never mention his name because what he said to me was horrible. I said, I really don't understand this. What should I do? And he said to me, why don't you try killing yourself? Yeah, that, and you ought to hear the gasp that I get in a school. Now, in fairness to him, I wasn't applying myself. Every time I could get an excuse to go to band, I went to band.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up flunking trig, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I need trig. I need it for what I want to do for a living. So I had to take it again. And this time I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Rays. And Mr. Rays was amazing. There were a couple things that were unique about him. One was he was not married and he was older. And the reason why it's important I say he wasn't married, he had nobody to check what he looked like when he left the house in the morning. And he routinely would get the buttons on his sweater misaligned. Like he would have an extra button at top and a buttonhole at the bottom. And it was just, and if he ate a sandwich and he had mustard on his hand, he'd wipe it on his shoulder.
So he had character.
He had character. But I remember about 2 weeks, 3 weeks into that class, he walked up to me and he said, Dave, how are you doing? And I said, Mr. A's, I'm struggling. And then he said to me, he says, do you fish? Now, he must have seen some doodling on my notebook or something. I said, yeah. And he said, do you know what a downrigger is? And I said, yeah. So he says, come on up here. And he went to the whiteboard, and he literally drew a boat and a downrigger and the lure. And he said, so how, if the weight is 60 feet below the surface of the water, and the lure is 100 feet behind the transom or behind the weight, how far from the transom of the boat is the lure? And I said, well, if we know this and we know this, we can calculate that. Mm-hmm. And he just looked at me and smiled. I said, that's trig. He goes, that's trig.
Mm-hmm. He connected with you on something.
He connected
right.
with me.
Mm-hmm.
He knew something I could connect with, I could relate to, and he made it, he brought it alive. It wasn't just triangles on a blackboard anymore or a whiteboard. So he was, again, it was by far still not a great subject for me, but I loved him as a teacher because he cared enough to learn to know me. Mm-hmm. Whereas the other teacher should have said, hey, Dave, you keep going to band, you're going to be totally confused. You need to stay here. Or Mr. Rays probably would have gone to Mr. Bishop, the band teacher, and said, don't let David come anymore because he's not doing well in my class. But the other teacher didn't care. And it was clear that he didn't care. And the result was I disconnected. And I wonder how many other students disconnected as well. Mm-hmm. So this ability to connect is huge for anybody that's going to give a talk or teach a class. The classes that I teach, I look at who's in the class. What companies do they come from? How can I make the topic we're talking about relative to them?
And I think it's also very applicable leading a meeting, and
yes,
or if you coach a sport, a kid's sport, talking with groups of parents, things like that. It's not just like, we're not talking about when, the one time that you're standing in front of a ton of people, in an auditorium. It's really any time that you're with a group of people or a few people. Really, you said that one of the talks that you gave was just in front of a table of people,
right?
Which I said was arguably harder than a room of people, for some of us, but
sure,
it's so applicable. There are many situations where this would be useful.
So now I want to tie what we talked about last week into this, and that's charisma. Mm-hmm. So last week we spent a lot of time talking about what is charisma, what isn't it? It really is a skill. It's something all of us can learn. And the key part about being charismatic is you have to be likable. Mm-hmm. And you are likable when you get the focus off you and keep it on the other person. Mm-hmm. You connect with people when you make it about them, not in a bad way, always in a positive and affirming way. Make it about them. Make it something they can relate to. And what I really love is like the best presenters really know how to do that. Mm-hmm. This was interesting. I did note it in my post. One of my fellow John Maxwell team members shared a post on our private Facebook group, and he was going to speak. He was doing a keynote for a small group of people. And I don't even remember, it was some association, but I don't remember what it was. but people didn't know who he was. So he came in ahead of time and literally went from table to table while people were gathering, sat down just to talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to know why they were there. What were they hoping to get out of that day? And that is a perfect example of someone who really wants to connect with the audience. One of the things I had to learn was, too often I thought, I have something I want to say. I have something I want to teach. When what I should have been asking was, what is it that they need to hear?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it that they need to learn? Then again, it's this charisma piece about reaching out to them, making myself somebody that's likable that they would want to connect with. One of the great examples is, and I think I may have shared this on a podcast during the heat of COVID, where John Maxwell was going to give a talk to a bunch of mayors just as this was unfolding. It really wasn't. We really weren't sure what was going to happen with the pandemic, and he was going to talk with these mayors, like a convention of mayors, and he had a talk that he wanted to give, but he was kind of working the group at the beginning, and he realized they're preoccupied with something else. So rather than give his normal talk from his chair and cocktail table like he usually does, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember the story right, he sat on the front of the stage and just engaged them in a conversation of what were their concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And how could you lead people through them? That's perfect. And when I think of speakers that really can be charismatic from a podium, so to speak, John's one that comes to mind. Watching, we talked the last couple weeks a lot about Dr. Zoe Chance, who wrote the book Influence is Your Superpower. I watched one of her talks on YouTube, and I don't know how long it was, but even virtually via YouTube, she grabbed my attention with the way she spoke
Mm-hmm.
and the stories she used.
So I have
her facial expressions.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I know that you would certainly participate in more of these experiences than I do, but do you have, like, when you're experiencing these amazing speakers or sitting through presentations or at your trainings, do you have kind of like a tell where you know that you're like experiencing a really great presenter with like amazing connection or charisma? Like, do you notice it in the moment, or do you figure that out later?
So let me give it to you from both perspectives, one
Mm-hmm.
from the speaker and one from the person listening. So when I'm listening, what I will notice is it's effortless.
Mm-hmm.
So I do notice it. I notice that, for instance, the way I wrote here, your eyes follow her, so to speak, as she's walking across the stage delivering the talk,
Mm-hmm.
type of thing. Your eyes don't wander. Like you don't. Sometimes you even have trouble making notes if it's a really, really good speaker,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to take your eyes off them, because you think, now with one of the things John Maxwell does that makes it easy is he typically sits in a chair next to a cocktail table of some sort. But I notice when he gets up, so he'll get up and then he'll go sit down again. And he does that for a reason. But yeah, in the moment, sometimes I'll notice it. Other times I'll just like, wait, where did the last hour go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you touched on one of the things that I was going to share, is that for me, I know that if I'm suddenly not taking a bunch of notes,
yes,
it's because I'm really connected and I don't really need them. Like I was always someone who was like really kind of impulsively writing down like everything my teacher was saying, getting all the notes, really trying to catch every word. And
yep.
But when I could connect really well with the teacher, the presenter, whatever, I didn't feel like I needed to rely on that so much. And so I unknowingly would kind of let up on that. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how I know that I'm really experiencing like an awesome presentation or speaker or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Like a super connection.
Mm-hmm. That like
is
I
what
just
happens.
I'm
Yep.
just taking it in, right? And I'm processing it in real time instead of being distracted by note taking so that I can, read every word over again later.
Right, right. Exactly. And one of the things too that I've noticed that I do with some, if I'm in a session and the speaker is connecting
Mm-hmm.
and I want to keep taking notes, I won't look at them. And I know that's horrible for the speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Truly it is. But it allows me to really think it through if it's something that I need to make notes on. Now again, I'm going to say that's horrible for the speaker because the speaker doesn't know if they're connecting with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, from the speaker's point of view, and this is something I noted in my post, is making eye contact with the people that you're speaking to.
Mm-hmm.
And Zoe Chance in her book, she refers to it as shining, and it's so interesting because you know when it's happening, and you're making eye contact with the listeners,
Mm-hmm.
and you can tell when there's a connection that's made.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an amazing, I was teaching a class this morning, and there was one part where I try not to make my classes lectures, but there was one part where the dialogue was going a bit long in my opinion, but I just started making sure that I was making eye contact with everybody, and I could feel the connection was still there,
Mm-hmm.
that they were understanding what it was I was saying and why I was saying it. And part of the key, so like when you've had these people that have connected with you, or you've connected with them, it's because of the way they delivered the content.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is, if I want to teach a principle, I can't just get up and teach no one can just get up and teach a principle, because we might as well be looking at equations on a whiteboard.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do is we shape the discussion or the content around the principle with using things like facts, details, statistics, and stories. And if you can illustrate it with a story, if you think about, like, when you're reading a good book, the author is able to paint the picture with words of what is describing a room or describing a day or describing a situation.
Mm-hmm.
Speakers do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that do it best draw you in so that the point, like, you can literally see what they're saying. And through that, then all of a sudden, once they've got you, they give you the teaching.
Right.
And you're like, oh my, I just learned something pivotal here, and I didn't even know it. And so John Maxwell is great at also adding humor to that.
Mm-hmm.
So personal stories, facts and figures, and humor make a speaker remarkable. And you just have to figure out and use your own personal stories. Think about your life. Our lives are full of amazing stories. Or if you can have a person that shared something with you and say, would you mind if I shared that? Most people, if it's a good story, people don't mind you sharing. You say, I was just talking with a friend of mine, and let me tell you this story that they just had.
Mm-hmm.
It really, it's amazing how those things draw you in, because it's real. It's not a principle anymore. It's, wow, this happened in this person's life, and this is how they reacted to it. Mm-hmm. Or this is how this leader, because since I'm typically teaching on leadership, this is how this leader was able to impact people. And this person who worked for them just shared this with me. Now, the other thing that I really want to encourage people to do is share your failures and use them as teaching moments. Because failures, nobody wants to hear how good somebody is.
Right.
But if you can use a failure, and I used it on my podcast, my worst leadership mistake ever.
Mm-hmm.
I use that in my classes a lot. And another thing that I'll do, when I get to a point where I'm sharing a personal story, a lot of times I'll sit in a chair.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'll literally get down to, and I will ask the class, I said, why, when I'm done with the story, I'll say, why did I sit down? Because I'm trying to teach them these principles of connecting with an audience. They said, because you want it to be more personal.
Mm-hmm.
I said, bingo. So use those things. So we talked about charisma, we talked about connecting, we talked about using your facts, your details, your statistics, and your personal stories, so that you can then make your point of the principle, the teaching that you want to have. The other thing is you got to keep it short, because you never know if people. I mean, I shouldn't say that. You do know if you're connecting with people, but you always want them wishing you had more content to give, because then they'll come back. Then they'll be glad when they see you again.
Yeah. Well, it's almost too. It's like keep it short, but also like don't make it longer than it needs to be. So maybe maybe it does. Maybe it is a 45-minute talk, but it's really engaging, and that's fine. So 45 minutes isn't necessarily short, but it's you're not making it an hour with 15 minutes of fluff, right? You're intentionally crafting what you're saying, and with the audience in mind, and focusing on them and that connection, making eye contact, infusing that humor, doing all of those things.
Exactly. And don't make a bunch of points in one talk. 3 might be all that people can really grasp.
Yeah. Yep. I do that. I think about that when I'm editing a lot. So while it's not necessarily speaking, but I like to leave space for the reader or the audience to read between the lines. And I intentionally don't want to tell them everything, because I know you think about who your audience is, right? So like when I'm editing something of yours or something of Randy's, and I'm like, okay, these are adults, and they, especially for some, both of you and Randy, a lot of them are leaders and have read some of your pieces already. I want them to make some of those connections on their own, to think about, because otherwise it can get really long, it can get really wordy, and it's like, no, these are people who are capable of drawing what they need from this. Right.
Very good. Oh, I love how you shared that. And even though you're not speaking, when you're writing, you're doing the same thing. How am I going to connect? I remember hearing one author say, when I finish a page, I ask myself the question, have I connected sufficiently that they'll turn the page?
Wow. Yeah.
That was brilliant when I heard that. Now, the one thing I do want to touch on real quick before we're done is the shorter the talk that you're going to give, the more preparation you need.
Yeah. I never thought about that until I read it in your post and kind of thought about it. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Because if I have an hour and a half, if you would say to me, Dave, I want you to talk about these 3 topics, and I'm going to give you 90 minutes. Okay. So I'll do some research on the topics. I might map out a few notes, and that's it. And it might take me 90 minutes to prep. But if you make me say something meaningful in 5 minutes, it's going to take me. I'm going to be working on that for days.
Yeah.
And I remember having to give a talk once at a MACNY event, and my wife was there, and I had these notes, and she saw me scribbling the notes at home for a couple days. And then on the way there, I think she might have driven the car, and I was still scribbling notes. And we sat down at the table, and I'm looking at my notes, and she goes, "Why are you so stressed?" I said, "Because I have 5 minutes to say some amazing things about people. And I don't want to mess it up." And I still messed it up. There was still one person that I wanted to recognize that I didn't, because I forgot. So just if the shorter, don't think if it's short, it's easy. It's not. The shorter it is, the harder it is. And you've got, and I think this about anything. If you're asked to do something, don't take shortcuts. Do it right, or don't do it.
Yeah, I think about when I think about TED Talks, which are so amazing. I've connected with so many of those, and I am always astounded with their presentation skills and how they're able to just communicate so much through both their words and their body language in such a short amount of time.
Exactly. You're exactly right. I kind of think like it too to the speakers we use for Live to Lead, where they get 30 minutes and there's a counter in front of them counting down from 30 minutes. And when they get to 0, they're supposed to be done.
Yeah.
And yet we'll talk for at least 15 minutes sometimes on what were our takeaways from a 30-minute talk. That's when you know they're really, really good at what they do. And all of us can get good if we practice. And we just, so the next time, for our listeners, the next time you're listening to somebody that's really doing a great job in a meeting, try to identify what makes it interesting. If you listen to a TED Talk, they're all over, on YouTube. Pick some. Which ones did you like? Why did you like it? Make notes, and then try to put those into your own talks that you're going to give for your teams. Did we miss anything?
You always ask me that, and I always think kind of the same thing. Like, I'm not the expert, but I think I don't know. I think it's there's like an awareness piece too, right?
Yep,
like
exactly.
And you kind of just touched on that. Like, go through and watch TED Talks, or think about experiences that you've had, and just be aware of like why it was so powerful, and and then try that in your next meeting, right? Like last week, was it last week we talked about tone and pitch of our voices.
Pitch, yeah.
And if you talk like lower and slower, you seem more confident. That, like, think about those things and learn from them.
And learn from it. And realize that your growth in your career is really connected to your ability to communicate. If you can't communicate, if you can't lead a good meeting, if you can't inspire a team, you can't lead. So I have no idea what we're talking about next week. Something will hit me. But this was supposed to be a 2-week series. It became a 3-week series. It won't be a 4-week series.
Will we get an encore?
We won't get an encore, but you'll be the first to know exactly what we're going to talk about, because I'm going to have to get it to you at the beginning of next week. So, hey, are there any spring things that you're going to be doing with your family?
Still kind of arranging that.
Okay.
But yeah, how about you? Do you have anything exciting coming up?
No. How's that?
Wow, look at us.
Nothing at all.
Nothing exciting in our lives.
Of course, I don't want to tell you that I'm really hoping it won't stay too warm too long, because I want to ski one more time.
Well, I was going to say that I'm not confident it's not going to be snowing again, so.
It will at some point, but I don't think in the next couple days. So at least go out and enjoy it with your girls.
I will.
So with that, I'm Dave Freund.
I'm Marisa Norcross.
This was The Next Week.